My name is Camila Pritchett, and I am the Executive Director at the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida Incorporated, which is housed here at the historic Lyric Theater Cultural Arts Complex. Thank you. I welcome you all here this evening on behalf of the Black Archives and our Board of Directors. Our board chair, who is serving as a panelist here tonight, Mrs. Patricia J. Braynon. And I am glad that you all could spend your evening with us in historic Overtown to talk with us about gratitude, gardening, community, and all of the things. Since the theme of tonight is gratitude, I wanted to say that I am grateful that I get to dedicate my life work to preserving Miami's rich and important history. Many of you were able to take a walk through our archives and see some of our holdings there. And in addition to preserving our history, preserving spaces such as the historic Lyric Theater, which, by the way, this year is celebrating its 110th anniversary of its construction. The historic Lyric Theater was built in 1913 by a Black businessman named Jeter Walker, and it is the oldest legitimate performing arts venue in Miami. It predates the Gusman, which was opened in 1926. Since our founding in 1977, our organization has not only worked to preserve our history, to save our spaces, but to also uplift and amplify Black culture. With the reopening of the Lyric Theater in 2014, we have been able to use this space to present arts, culture, and educational entertainment that uplifts our community and our people. I also would like to take a moment to thank the sponsors who help what we do here possible, and that would be the Southeast Overtown Park West Community Redevelopment Agency, the City of Miami Commissioner Christine King, Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, Miami-Dade County Commissioner Keon Hardiman, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Florida African American Heritage Preservation Network. Last year, we partnered with Miami Book Fair to bring programming from the festival, which is historic in its own right, over here to Overtown. And after we had such a great experience, we knew we had to continue that partnership, and that's what we're doing tonight, bringing you programming that aligns with both of our missions. So I am grateful for you being here with us tonight. For our guest panelists, and before I introduce you to our panel, I would like to bring up Lisette Mendez, who will bring greetings from Miami Book Fair.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Lisette. I'm the programs director for the Miami Book Fair. And in the spirit of this book and these poems that have brought us together tonight to celebrate the Big Read, which has been going on through the month of March and will continue through the month of April, I just want to give thanks. I want to give thanks to all the partners and the friends who have made today possible. Our hosts here at the Lyric Theater and the archives, Camila and Cece and everyone who maintains this beautiful theater that I love so much. Our friends at O Miami, I see a t-shirt, but I know Scott and Melody are back there and the rest of the gang. We had such a great morning today. We partnered up to bring Ross to high school to talk to high school students, and that was really a highlight for me, as it usually is. But they have been tirelessly promoting poetry for years now. And if you guys, picked up some of their, papers and whatnot up in the front, or go online and make sure to catch all the events that are coming up as part of the O Miami Month of Poetry. And always come to MiamiBookFair.com to also check out all the great things we're doing. And so I also want to thank our other partner in all things literary, and that's Books and Books. Mitchell Kaplan, who owns Books and Books and is a founder of Miami Book Fair, and his his staff always everywhere, that we are making sure that there are books for you guys to buy. And I also want to thank my colleagues at the Miami Book Fair, the hardest working bunch of people. It's my pleasure to see them every day, whether in the office or on Zoom. I can't thank their praises enough. And I definitely, our home, Miami-Dade College, our college president, Madeline Pumariega, our vice president, Miriam Laguna Borrego, who are incredible supporters of everything we do at the fair. And I do want to acknowledge the Big Read is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, in part also by our friends of the fair, many of whom are here tonight, our membership group, the state of Florida, and of course, Miami-Dade County Cultural Affairs Department, without whom neither the Lyric nor I would, or us at Book Fair would really be able to do much. So thank you all for coming. And now I bring Camila back to introduce to you our guests.
All right. Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry: Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Beholding, winner of the PEN American Literary Gene Stein Award, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. His first collection of essays, The Book of Delights, was released in 2019 and was a New York Times bestseller. His new collection of essays, Inciting Joy, was released by Algonquin in 2022. Mrs. Patricia Braynon was the director of the Housing Finance Authority of Miami-Dade County from 1990 until her retirement in 2014. During her career with government, she also served assistant county manager. Mrs. Braynon, a 4th-generation Miamian, and her husband Oscar are members of 2 of Miami's pioneer African-American families. She serves as the current chairperson of the board of the Black Archives and Historic Lyric Theater, and is actively involved with many other service organizations. Retirement has afforded her a greater opportunity to further explore her passions of family genealogical research and gardening. Patricia is an accomplished orchid grower and backyard gardener who has lovingly transformed her home garden into a tropical oasis. Her master gardener training is evident in the plush vegetable, flower, and fruit trees on her family's urban homestead. That you can visit her home garden on YouTube at PJ Braynon. Our moderator for this evening, Nicole Tallman, serves as the poetry ambassador for Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, a position she has held since April 2021. In this role, Nicole created the county's very first Poet Laureate program and works alongside the Poet Laureate to celebrate and elevate poetry and poets, connect community, and promote literacy and learning. Nicole is the author of 3 poetry collections: Something Kindred from the Southern Collective Experience Press 2022, Poems for the People, the Southern Collective Experience Press 2023, and Ferace, forthcoming from ELJ Editions in November of this year. She also serves as poetry and interviews editor for the Blue Mountain Review and an associate editor for South Florida Poetry Journal. You can find her on Twitter and Instagram at @Tallman, and she's also at NicoleTallman.com and miamidade.gov/poetry. So without further ado, Ross Gay, Mrs. Patricia Braynon, and Nicole Tallman.
Thank you. I think this is right. I stand here, right? Okay. Thank you so much. Good to be here. Good to be with you all. And thanks for reading this book, for those of you who did, and, like picking it up for free out there. If there's extras left over, take some. Yeah, it's amazing. It's so fun. I went with my friends, Scott and Melody, to a banana farm yesterday. So it's just been like a great trip, It's just been amazing. But yeah, it's been really fun. The handful of times I've been here for poetry type stuff, not every single time, but most of them, it's been through Miami. So I wanted to just shout you all out, and also read the poem that's on this pen. They have these wild pens that they made. Miami makes the wildest shit. That's the thing. And I have a parking ticket poem in my pocket too. But this poem says, yes. Like, who thinks of that? And it says, joy, this is by Sarah in the 3rd grade. It says, joy is when my mother rises up like the sun. So, yeah, thank you to the book festival. Thank you to everyone. It's been really fun being here. I'm going to read a few poems from the book, and then and maybe a couple delights. And I have this new book coming out in September, and it's another book of delights. So I might read just a few of those too, to hear them out loud. I haven't heard too many of them out loud, so I'll put you through that too. This is called "To the Fig Tree on 9th and Christian." This is in Philadelphia. Anything you need to know? Not really. Except that this is like a real story. Sometimes, poems are like, oh yeah, they imagined it. And the speaker is not the poet and all that. The speaker is me. And I was walking down the street, and there's like a fig tree that's like 25 feet tall, and it was like making a mess. There was so much figs. Which in Philadelphia is special. In Miami, you might be like, yeah, whatever. To the fig tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through the city in my mind without once looking up, the racket in the lug work, probably rehearsing some stupid thing I said or did, some crime or other. The city, they say, is a lonely place until, yes, the sound of sweeping, and a woman, yes, with a broom, beneath which you are now too, the canopy of a fig. Its arms pulling the September sun to it. And she has a hose too, and so works hard, rinsing and scrubbing the sidewalk, lest some poor sod slip on the silk of a fig and break his hip and not probably reach over to gobble up the perpetrator. The light catches the veins in her hands when I ask about the tree. They flutter in the air, and she says, take as much as you can, please help me. So I load my pockets and mouth, and she points to the step ladder against the wall to mean take more, but I was without a sack, so my meager plunder would have to suffice. And an old woman whom gravity was pulling into the earth loosed one from a low-slung branch, and its eye wept like hers, which she dabbed with a kerchief as she cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth. And soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it like a constellation, pointing, do you see it? And I am tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of yellow jackets, sugar-stoned, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach, like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance of the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body, where I ate my first fig from the hand of a man who escaped his country by swimming through the night, and maybe never said more than 5 words to me at once, but he gave me figs. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. Come here, baby, he says, and blows a kiss to the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean and favoring the rocky, sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily. But no one told the fig tree or the immigrants. There is a way the fig tree grows in groves. It wants, it seems, to hold us. Yes, I am anthropomorphizing, God damn it. I have twice in the last 30 seconds rubbed my sweaty forearm into someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful, eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most which has murdered its own people. This is true. We are feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and 9th, strangers maybe never again. Thank you. And this is called Burial, and it's a poem that I like to ask before I read it if anyone has done anything interesting with their placenta. There's some kind of calculus about like where in the country you ask this question. Like if you ask it in Vermont, everyone raises their hand. I remember I asked it once in Los Angeles, and at a fancy place in Los Angeles, and people looked at me like, take him away. Anyway, volunteers. Okay. I think this might be like peer pressure that people aren't saying anything. Some people plant them with, yeah. Someone, go ahead, say it. Oh, you have it encapsulated in pills. Did you bring them with you? Just joking. Yeah, that people do that. I've heard like smoothies and stuff. But planting them with a tree, that's what I'm getting at. Thanks. This is called Burial. You're right. The fertilizer's good. It wasn't a gang of dullards came up with chucking a fish in the planting hole, or some midwife got lucky with the placenta. Oh, I'll plant a tree here. And a sudden flush of quince and jam enough for months. Yes, the magic dust our bodies become casts spells on the roots about which someone else could tell you the chemical processes, but it's just magic to me. Which is why a couple springs ago, when first putting in my 2 bare root plum trees out back, I took the jar which has become my father's house, and lonely for him and hoping to coax him back for my mother as much as me, I poured some of him into the planting holes. And he dove in, glad for the robust air, saddling a slight gust into my nose and mouth, chuckling as I coughed. But mostly he disappeared into the minor yawns in the earth, into which I placed the trees, splaying wide their roots and casting the gray dust of my old man evenly throughout the hole, replacing then the clods of dense Indiana soil until the roots and my father were buried, watering it all in with one hand while holding the tree with the other, straight as the flag to the nation of simple joy, of which my father is now a naturalized citizen. Waving the flag from his subterranean lair, the roots curled around him like shawls or jungle gyms, like hookahs or the arms of ancestors, before breaststroking into the xylem, riding the elevator up through the cambium into the leaves where, when you put your ear close enough, you can hear him whisper, "Good morning." Where, if you close your eyes and push your face, you can feel his stubbly jowls. And good Lord, this year he was giddy at the first real fruit set and nestled into the 30 or 40 plums in the 2 trees, peering out from the sweet meat with his hands pressed against the purple skin like cathedral glass. And imagine his joy as the sun wizarded forth those abundant sugars, and I plodded barefoot and prayerful at the first ripe plum swell and blush, almost weepy, conjuring some surely ponderous verse to convey this bottomless grace. You know, oh Father kind of stuff. Hundreds of hot air balloons filling the sky on my chest. replacing his intubated body, listing like a boat keel side up, replacing the steady stream of water from the one eye which his brother wiped before removing the tube, keeping his hand on the forehead until the last wind in his body wandered off, while my brother wailed like an animal, and my mother said, weeping, "It's okay, you can go, honey." At all of which my father guffawed by kicking from the first bite of plum buckets of juice down my chin, staining one of my 2 button-down shirts, the salmon-colored silk one, hollering, "There's more of that," almost dancing now in the plum, in the tree, the way he did as a person, bent over and biting his lip and chucking the one hip out and then the other with his elbows cocked and fists loosely made and eyes closed and mouth made trumpet when he knew he could make you happy just by being a little silly and sweet. Thank you. This is called Ode to the Puritan in Me. There is a Puritan in me, the brim of whose hat is so sharp it could cut your tongue out. With a brow so furrowed, you could plant beets or turnips or something, of course, good for storing. He has not taken a nap since he was 2 years old because he detests sloth above all. He is maybe the only real person I've ever heard say sloth or detest in conversation. He reads poetry, the Puritan in me, with an X-Acto knife in his calloused hand, if not a stick of dynamite. And if the Puritan in me sees 2 cats making whoopee in the barn, I think not because they get in the way or scare the cows, but more precisely because he thinks it is worthless, the angles of animals fucking freely in the open air, he will blast them to smithereens. I should tell you, the Puritan in me always carries a shotgun. He wants to punish the world, I suppose, because he feels he needs punishing for who knows how many unpunishable things. Like the times as a boy he'd sneak shirtless between the cows to haul his tongue across the salt lick, or how he'd study his dozing granny's instep like it was the map of his county, or the spring nights he'd sneak to the garden behind the sleeping house and strip naked while upon him lathered the small song of the ants rasping their tongues across the peony's sap, making of his body a flower-dappled tree, while above him the heavens wheeled and his tongue drowsed slack as a creek, on the banks of which, there he is, right now, the Puritan in me, tossing his shotgun into the cattails, taking off his boots and washing his feet in that water. Okay, let me read you a delight. So for those of you who don't know this book, this is it's called the Book of Delights. You know, I just kind of came into the idea. It was given to me. It feels like it was given to me. Maybe a bird said it in my head. I was having a really sweet day in a moment of delight. I realized, I'm in a moment of delight. And then I thought, I should write a little essay about this. And the bird said, do it every day for a year. So I did it every day for a year. And this is that book. It's not 365. It's 102 essays about things that delighted me. This one is called Tomato on Board. By the way, this theater is so beautiful. Thank you so much for hosting us. It's just amazing. Thank you. Tomato on board. What you don't know until you carry a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane is that carrying a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane will make people smile at you almost like you're carrying a baby. A quiet baby. I did not know this until today, carrying my little tomato about 3 or 4 inches high in its 4-inch plastic starter pot, which my friend Michael gave to me, smirking about how I was going to get it home. Something about this at first felt naughty, not comparing a tomato to a baby, but carrying the tomato onto the plane. And so I slid the thing into my bag while going through security, which made them pull the bag for inspection. When the security guy saw it was a tomato, he smiled and said, "I don't know how to check that. Have a good day." But I quickly realized that one of its stems, which I almost wrote as arms, was broken from the jostling, and it only had 4 of them, so I decided I better just carry it out in the open, and the shower of love began. It was a shower of love I also felt while carrying a bouquet of lilies through the streets of Rome last summer. People, maybe women especially, maybe women my age-ish and older especially, smiling with approval. A woman in a house dress beating out a rug on a balcony shouted, "Bravo!" An older couple holding hands both smiled at me and pulled into each other, knitting their fingers together. My showerers might have been disappointed to know I was not giving the lilies to a sweetheart, but to my friends Damiano and Moira, who had translated a few of my poems into Italian and were so kind as to let me stay at their place a couple nights while I was passing through. On the way to the vegetarian restaurant Damiano's ex-wife owns with her partner, we walked by what I'm pretty sure he said was the biggest redbud tree in the world. It stretched for yards, lounging periodically onto the mossy earth. Its beautiful black bark glistened by the streetlights. Though translation is an act of love, so my showerers needn't be disappointed at all. Before boarding the final leg of my flight, one of the workers said, "Nice tomato," which I don't think was a come-on. And the flight attendant asked about the tomato at least 5 times, not an exaggeration, every time calling it my tomato. "Where's my tomato? How's my tomato? You didn't lose my tomato, did you?" She even directed me to an open seat in the exit row. "Why don't you guys go sit there and stretch out?" I gathered my things and set the little guy in the window seat so she could look out. When I got my water, I poured some into the little guy's soil. When we got bumpy, I put my hand on the little guy's container, careful not to snap another arm off. And when we landed and the pilot put the brakes on hard, my arm reflexively went across the seat, holding the little guy in place, the way my dad's arm would when he had to brake hard in that car without seatbelts to speak of, in one of my very favorite gestures in the Encyclopedia of Human Gestures. Thank you. It's funny because one of the benefits about like writing something called the Book of Delights is that people say, "Oh, I have delights." They want to share their delights with you, and that makes your day better. And people have told me, "Oh yeah, I was carrying a flower on the plane the other day, and everyone was nice to me." Kind of sweet. Okay, this is called An Abundance of Public Toilets. I don't mean this delight to diminish the dignity-violating absence of public toilets, public bathrooms in New York City, which is a failure and a carelessness, a ruthlessness, in fact, that reminds me somehow that ours is a country where property is more valued than people are. Nor do I want this delight, which was occasioned by the lavatorial deprivation New York City is, which every one of you has a friend with a bad story about, to be a delight about deprivation. Though it might be that deprivation and the alleviation or deprivation of that deprivation is one of the sources of delight. Source is the wrong word, one of the flashlights upon delight, the unveilers, the ticklers, some word that explains how delight originates in the delighted is what I mean, and is simply stimulated or awakened. Not too long ago, I was buying some lumber at the local hardware store to build a raised bed. It was summer, melon season, a time of year I tend to be abundantly hydrated. As I was sliding my 2x12s into the car, I realized I really needed to pee. Like, really, really. But for some reason, I felt shy asking to use the loo. I wanted an espresso anyway, and I figured I'd just pull into the bakery around the corner, except when I got there, all the parking was taken. And now it was bad, real bad. And so I started looking around for abandoned buildings or little clutches of trees where I could piss, but I had no luck, being more or less downtown. Not to mention the muscles of my mid and lower back were now starting to seize up, thanks to whatever taxing physiological business clamps the urethra shut. I had a friend once who had to pee bad, but being a new guy at a law firm in a meeting that wouldn't stop, he held it for a very long time until the meeting did finally stop, and while removing his member from his slacks at the urinal, he fainted. I will never forget this story. And given as mine is a small town, and mine is a public occupation, I thought better of pulling into the parking lot next to the family video and letting loose against the wall in full view of everyone on Grimes Street. One of them, of course, an old student who got a C- capturing my indecent drainage with his phone for later upload. I chose instead to pee my pants in my car. I peed and peed in my pants, my shorts, in my car, and then I peed some more. The word chose there made the not exactly accident seem more volitional than it really was. Though driving while in a bathroom panic is unsafe, and so I approve of my choice for that reason too. Regardless, the delight of the car peeing was in the alleviation of the mental and physical anguish of holding the pee in. It was a deprivation of a deprivation. And the delight, for it was a delight, as the vinyl seats of my Subaru became a pool of well-hydrated urine, would not have occurred had the original deprivation, having to pee and nowhere to do it, not occurred. Yeah, some shame and such. This essayette's helping me work it out. I fully understand that this delight and what is coming to look like an appeal to you to view it as such might not be a delight for you. Delight is like that. All the same, it seems illuminating. And so it was that when I was in Greenwich Village, again well hydrated, but this time from coffee without a bathroom, and I asked the barista where he might urinate if he couldn't pee in the place where he just spent $4.50 for a short fucking Americano. He pointed to the park across the street, which had a porta potty. When I entered, I found that it was a very clean porta potty. And urinating, I noticed for the first time, standing up and kind of tall like I am, that the tops of porta potties have screens that you can look out of, which I did. Like I was in a confessional. Like I was a priest, watching the parishioners walk by as the noon bells to the nearby church started to ring. Thank you for bearing with that. I only lost one person. Actually, when I read that one, people tell me it makes them have to go to the bathroom. They have to pee. So if anyone has to, no hard feelings, go pee. Or you can have a delight. This is called, where's this one? Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. And there's a reference, I don't say it, but there's a kind of reference to the poet Nazım Hikmet, beautiful Turkish poet who was locked up for years for being a communist, his political prisoner. And he would say things in his poems like, this is not something to be taken lightly, you know, the joy of this or that. Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. No one knew, or at least I didn't know they knew, what the thin discs threaded here on my shirt might give me in terms of joy. This is not something to be taken lightly. The gift of buttoning one's shirt slowly, top to bottom, or bottom to top, or sometimes the buttons will be on the other side, and I'm a woman that morning, slipping the glass through its slot. I tread differently that day, or some of it anyway. My conversations are different, and the car bomb slicing the air and the people in it for a quarter mile. And the honeybee's legs furred with pollen mean another thing to me than on the other days, which too have been drizzled in this simplest of joys, in this world of spaceships and subatomic this and that, 2, maybe 3 times a day some days. I have the distinct pleasure of slowly untethering the one side from the other, which is like unbuckling a stack of vertebrae with delicacy. For I must only use the tips of my fingers, with which I will one day close my mother's eyes. This is as delicate as we can be in this life. Practicing like this, giving the raft of our hands to the clumsy spider and blowing soft until she lifts her damp heft and crawls off. We practice like this, pushing the seed into the earth like this, first in the morning, then at night. We practice sliding the bones home. All right. I think it's probably, I'll do one more. This is called Goodbye, Nana. We're spending a little time in Frenchtown, New Jersey, helping my partner Stephanie's mother, Myrna, as she recovers from hip replacement surgery, for which, if he wasn't so goddamn cute, we'd blame Noah the dog, who bolted hard after a squirrel while Myrna was walking him a few nights ago, yanking her right into the hospital. After I was walking the cute little brute this morning, my phone, which mostly doesn't work in this town, got a brief flash of bars, during which it delivered to me the message from my brother. Sad news, Nana died. The last time I saw my Nana was in October of 2019, when I was reading at a big church in Youngstown, Ohio, where much of my father's side of the family lives and where I was born. About 15 minutes before the reading was to begin, in comes a train of my family, a mostly elderly train. And when they walked into that church, it felt like they were bringing with them thousands and thousands of us. As they were walking in, someone alerted me that Uncle Roy and Nana were out back. This uncle had come all the way from Philly for this reading, swinging up to Cleveland to get Nana on his way, and had brought her here, which, given as his back has been kicking his ass, and his mother could no longer really walk, and other things, this was a labor of love. My uncle brought the hybrid wheelchair walker contraption to her side of the car, helped her out. There was a brief, frightening moment of teetering, and then she dropped into her vehicle, exhaling with a giggle, and I wheeled her into the church. She was facing me, riding backward, smiling up at me, toothless now, like a child. She told me she was mad at me for who knows what, and when I gave her a for who knows what face, which involved a grandsonly grin, she got over it and smiled some more. After I stationed her midway back in the church with the rest of the family, I returned to the pulpit where I read and was as vulgar as I cannot help but be, about which my Nana, a deeply religious woman who will preach your ear off, believe you me, if she spots a crack, you'll get you some Jesus, some Lord. And she gave no shits. Nana's into the Lord, not fussing about naughty words. The family went to Perkins afterward, and Nana, schooled in churchical performance and with an eye and ear for the craft of the sermon, which the reading is a version of, smiled over her menu and said, "Rossi, you had them wrapped around your finger." She laughed in that wispy way when I smiled and said, "Thank you, Nana." And then she said, as she often did when delighted, "Lord have mercy." My Uncle Roy showed me 8,000 pictures of his new grandbaby, pictures that all seemed like the same picture to me. But the baby is not my grandbaby. And Nana and her sister Butter jawed at each other about who worked harder at their mother Biggie's barbershop, a version of the same fight I bet they've been having for almost a century. Butter throws verbal knives without looking up from her menu, but after Nana's checked hers, she looks around and laughs and makes eyes like, "You hear me?" My Nana was a certain kind of difficult person who had been forged in varieties of difficulty. She struggled, maybe you'd call it, with mental health stuff in ways I've often felt close to. So close that for a spell and desperate for an explanation or source to my troubles, and reading the books and the websites, I thought, oh, it skips a generation, that's gonna be me. She put her home phone rotary in her purse is what I'm saying. She once slashed up her furniture with a knife so no one would take it, and smashed up all the china my folks sent her when they were in Guam. Though who knows my father's troubles, the ones he tamped down by working and drinking. He seems mostly to have taken those with him to the grave. All of which is to say, maybe after it got me, I just kind of got it, and I more kind of got her. Hers was a universe running parallel to ours, and periodically the two lined up. Like when I'd be driving her down to see my father, who was dying in a hospital called Mercy, who was soon to become her second dead son. And a song might come on, let it be Marvin Gaye, let it be Al Green, and we'd sing it together. And she'd laugh and say, all right, Rossi. Or 2 Christmases ago when I was at my mother's and we called and got to talking about her meal, what she cooked herself. And when she got to the cornbread, I asked, how'd you learn it, Nana? She said, Mama, almost like, where else would I have learned it? And when I asked if she measured, she said, no, I make it the old way. We just know. This delight has an odd shape and feel, I am realizing. And maybe that's because it's an elegy. A goodbye I will surely be working on until I follow her out of here. Which reminds me of 2 things. The way she said my name, the first syllable open and soft like a saucer or a pool, like a warm bath in the middle of a garden. The second syllable she lilted up, like a bird shaking jewels of water from her before lifting from that bath. That's what my Nana sounded like sometimes. And if she didn't call me Rossi, she called me baby. Like when we last got off the phone. And I said, I love you, Nana. And she said, I love you too, baby. And then, for emphasis, Thank you very much.
Wow. I'm laughing so hard over here. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, a show of hands. Not that I can really see you because these lights are really bright in my face, but how many people in the audience are poets? Okay. And do we have gardeners here too? Awesome. Okay, so when I was asked to moderate this conversation, I'm obviously I've read Ross's book several times, but I was delighted that Pat Braynon was joining us because I knew that she was a gardener, and I have my 2 homes here. I'm from Michigan originally, but I've been in South Florida for almost 20 years now, and so I wanted to start out by asking, because I think it's a point of commonality between the 2 of you, how you both came to gardening, what brought you to that. So do you want to start, Pat? Oh, you need help with your microphone? Here, hang on a second.
I think I got it.
Does Ross have one too?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, well, good evening. I hope you can hear me well. But yes, well, thank you. And hearing Ross read the poems, I understand them better. Because I've been calling everyone. I said, help me, I need to understand the poems. I called my little cousin, Christelle, right there. I said, Christelle, I need help. I call a friend of mine who's an English teacher, I need help. But hearing you, which is what I understand when you hear it versus just reading it, it begins to go somewhere in your head. So thank you. Yes. So for me to answer the question, I've been gardening as long as I can remember. I always had a little something growing at our family home. I remember my dad had a little plot of land, not land really, it was just like, I guess, the size of a window box, and he let me plant some seeds there. And I remember the first thing I planted, it was zinnias, and when those flowers opened, I had to be the proudest 10-year-old you have ever seen. But that was my first thing that, I recall planting, but my family, which our family home is just a block from here where we grew up, there were always trees in our yard. Mango, of course, guava, the things you think of when you think of South Florida. As a South Florida gardener, we're lucky that we're able to grow a lot of things. People sometimes think only of vegetables, but there are certain things that we can grow here. So I just have always, in our travels, I, like you, carried the tomato seed. I had an orchid I once carried from California here on the airplane. They told me it wouldn't grow here. It lived for a little while, but it never bloomed, just like they told me. But I carried it on the airplane, the little plant, because I was determined to grow that orchid here. But it survived, it just didn't thrive, you know. And so different areas you can grow different things is one of the things I learned as a gardener.
How about you, Ross?
I started gardening when I moved to Indiana. I kind of we grew up in an apartment complex, so we didn't really have any place to garden. Though my mother, she would always have impatiens and like a lily or two. But then I moved to Indiana, and although, you know, like where we lived, I realized that 95 is right here, right?
Yes.
We lived outside of Philadelphia where you could throw a baseball and hit I-95. Not that we would. And along the edge of the there was like a little woods, and along the edge of the woods there was raspberries, wild raspberries, and blackberries, brambles and stuff. And then there was a mulberry tree in the apartments, right, kind of on the edge of the apartments, in like a little, it's like a little patch of stuff that wasn't tended in between the apartments and the little elementary school on the other side. And we would spend time. I mean, a handful of us would, but I would like go with my Tupperware and fill up. I'd go harvest. I'd go forage. So even when I didn't have my own thing, I was like, you know, I love fruit, you know. And I have grandparents on both sides, but my mother's folks were farmers, and then they moved into town, and you know, had a big garden, so they always were doing that. And I remember right where my grandpa parked his pickup truck, there was a chokecherry tree, and so that was just part of the thing. When we would come back from we'd go with him trapping gophers, you know, we'd pick chokecherries. And then my Nana, who I mentioned, you know, she always on her like little porch. She always had a porch, and she would always grow peppers and tomatoes and greens, you know. And so, you know, I come to it like we all kind of do, yes. You know, honestly, or whatever you say, naturally.
That makes sense. I'm wondering, because you both have jobs besides gardening, at what point do you bring gardening into your life? I guess, do you wake up and like one of the first things you do is go check on your garden, or is it something you do when you come home? I live in an apartment building. I don't have a backyard. Okay, I just have concrete, like a pool behind me. So I'm just kind of curious what it's like to live somewhere where you actually have a garden maybe in your backyard, and how you blend that into your daily life.
So yes, I have a garden in my backyard, and since I've retired, it has expanded and taken over most of the backyard, which I'm happy to say. And it's one of the first things. Many times I'm up before my husband, who's right there, so I'm going to talk about him. I'm up earlier, and when he gets up, he'll come up and he'll look for me, and I'm out back. I'm in my backyard. I'm communing with nature. That's how I start my mornings, many mornings, and he'll call me in and he'll say, "Have you eaten yet?" And I'm like, "Well, of course not, you know, unless I've picked some tomatoes off my tree or some berries off of one of my trees." I know, I go out, and it's something about the sun. It just gets everything in you going, and I'm ready to face the day. Now, if I have an early morning and I miss that, as soon as I come back, I kick off my shoes, put on my garden boots, and I head right outside to see what's going on. So I'm out there almost every single day. It just brings such joy. And now it's a form of art for me. It de-stresses you. It is something that relieves whatever else is going on in the world. You can forget. You can be out there. Yeah.
I love that. You know, partly I think that de-stressing stuff is because being in a garden is a place where you're attending to the real, whereas so much of our lives, you know, like I could go on tirades about phones and such. It's so boring. I'm not gonna. But there's so much of our lives is like sort of engaging with this virtual thing. But you go to a garden, and partly the reason it's so moving, and I think probably calming, is because it's like an exchange or an interaction or a joining with the actual world, which it feels so lovely. I don't garden every day, sometimes because I'm in Miami giving readings,
Right.
But I also, where I live, it's cold, so you have like time off, from the garden. And I, when it's garden time, I'm out there. There's times I'm like a lot of time, and then my nature is to sort of have a situation where I go hard, and then I can kind of just go a little bit and tool around and check things and harvest a little bit. But I do feel like it's a lucky thing. It's a good thing to be able to spend a little bit of time every day. God.
Yes. So, would you have any particular tips for someone who happens to live in an urban space and might not have access to green space to be able to bring a little bit of nature into our environment?
Sure. I did not always live in my current home. My husband was in the military and we traveled, so many times we were in base housing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, it depended on where we were, you had enough land or how long we were going to be there. We lived in Maine, and so that was a very interesting challenge. Totally opposite from living in South Florida. Mm-hmm. So I learned how to garden there and what you do, and then sometimes we only had a balcony when we lived in a apartment. But I always had something growing. Not always edible when we lived, we got little kids, we don't have time. So they all received what's called an aero garden. So it's sort of like a water garden, which is indoors, and the light comes on and it tells you when to feed it, when to give it water. And my niece is so excited when she gets something from her garden. She'll make a little salad, show me with her little micro tomatoes. I showed her, you can make a tomato tree and get actual tomatoes, and she made her little salad, got her herbs, and you can grow that inside your unit if you're in a condo or an apartment. On your balcony, you grow in containers, and you can grow a number of things and have a number of things. My daughter, who's right there, and a newbie gardener, I gave her a veggie truck, so it's a little bit of a raised bed garden that she put on her balcony. And because she doesn't have as much space in her backyard, but she's able to, I went by today and she said, see, I got all these tomatoes off my little tree. And she said, watch, I'm going to eat it. So, no matter where you are, you can grow something. Be it edible or be it just something beautiful to look at, like orchids, which is another passion of mine.
Yeah, and there's so many people grow beautiful plants inside apartments. So I would say I would also check with people who your neighbors, and see who has good plants. You know what I mean? That's who too.
That's a good tip. Now that Pat's warmed up on poetry, I'm wondering if if we might talk a little bit about the role of poetry in civic life.
Like what?
Should we just keep it light and fun? Would you rather do that? We could talk a little about the practice of gratitude if you'd prefer that.
I'm glad to talk about poetry in the in civic life. I would just, let's see. How would I answer that? I love that. It's a big question. Those big questions, when I hear them, I'm always like, but I'll just say something like, I'm totally winging it. Something, I don't know, there's something about whatever civic life is, that's a thing. That itself requires some conversation, obviously. You could, I'm like a terms person. I'm a terms guy. Right. So what do we mean by civic life? But poetry, if you say many things that poetry is, but among the things it is a kind of practice, a musical practice of the imagination or something like that. I don't know. Or even a way in which we sort of, with music and with breath, commune with wonder. Mm-hmm. That seems useful. And I'm not it's funny, I don't advocate for poetry. I don't think poetry needs an advocate. I think it's just like anytime I go to a funeral, anytime I go to a wedding, there's a poem. Like, I'm not worried about it. So I'm not like, go get more poems. I'm like, poetry's gonna be okay, you know. But I do feel like that is something that is a useful endeavor for life, you know, to be sort of involved in the deep, to be practicing having a kind of capacity for wonder, which means also a loving relationship to what we don't know, you know, which I think civic life requires, you know. I think, and you know, we were just in a school today. That's it's sort of where civic life is beginning. And so often, you know, it seems to me that I'm a college professor. It seems to me that one of my jobs, although it often isn't the job of the school, because in a way the job of the school is to build obedient civic people. There's a kind of civic participation that requires a certain kind of obedience sometimes. And that's not my interest, and that's not poetry's interest either. Poetry's interest is actually disobedience. You know?
True.
Poetry is disobedient. Yes. And so I'm sort of, when I'm thinking about like teaching and stuff and poetry, and to some extent like, you know, this sort of what it means to be in community, that's my curiosity. I am sort of thinking about how do we reside together with our mysteries? And I think poetry helps us do that, you know? And I think that question maybe also helps us love one another better, which I care about, you know?
I kind of see it as community building in a lot of ways too. I'm curious about some of for the poets in the room and the people who are interested in poetry, talking about. I mean, are there specific correlations for you between poetry and gardening in this community building sense, or not so much?
No, I mean, I can make connections. Like, there's not a better metaphor. Maybe a child, maybe children. But there's not a better metaphor for metaphor than seeds.
Yes.
And here's why, for those of you who don't garden. Like a little seed, say a little kale seed, if I was holding it like this, none of you would be able to see it. Right. But it would be right there. Imagine it. Inside of that kale seed, you know, if I planted, you know, if we together planted that kale seed, it would make a kale plant, you know, and that kale plant would make, I don't know, but let's say 1,000 seeds. Each of those seeds, you're better than me at math. It's a big number. It would be way more than we could all eat. And then it makes some more seeds. Inside of that, it's kind of a theory of abundance. But you also have to be able to get your head around, again, which is to me kind of a radical theory. You know, it's a disobedient theory. Especially, see, you get me these questions, I want to just like go off. You know, capitalism requires that we imagine a kind of scarcity. It depends on scarcity. You know, you impose scarcity. Seeds are these sort of the evidence to the contrary. Seeds are like, there's enough to eat. You don't even have to play with the seeds. Use the ones that came. There's enough to eat. Yeah. So anyway, that to me is like, that's a poetic thing. It's like an imaginative, it's like, oh, that's where you learn metaphor. You look at a seed. You get to know a seed. A million other ways. Children are interesting, you know, the sky, the stars, you know, all that stuff.
I love that answer.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things that the book fair was doing was asking people to write notes of gratitude. I don't know if you were able to see that online or not, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about your gratitude practice if you're willing, and I'm sure Pat has some thoughts on this as well.
Yes, well, definitely. Gardening gives you the opportunity to be grateful. I mean, you like Ross said, you plant these little tiny seeds and, you know, you're hoping that something will come up, but always you get so much from it. I got my brother who's also over there, I brought my whole family, and I got him. I want to make sure there's somebody here to listen to me, right? So So I got him into gardening because I would plant seeds, and suddenly I have all these little seedlings, and I could not possibly plant them all in my yard. So now he's become a gardener. And his wife has become a gardener because I've gotten them into gardening. But it's the gratitude of seeing, your work, the efforts of your work, and then, you're able to eat it because we're doing edible gardening, of course. But even if not, you're able to see it. And it gives you such a feeling of joy to see this. I mean, until you do it, it's hard to understand the joy that comes from just planting those little tiny seeds and sharing them with others. And it builds community, what you were talking about, because you get a community of people who are also interested in these little tiny seeds, the plants that come from them, the food that comes from them, all of which you're able to share with the other gardeners, with other people who may not be as interested at first in gardening, but once they start with a little tiny seed, they become gardeners. And I just met a lady in the lobby, and she said, I came out here and I live around the corner from you. I'm like, really? I'm like, what's your name? And she came because she too is a gardener, and we just made a little community now.
I just want to say that is like a theory of gratitude, what you just explained, and it's that, and the theory of gratitude is that, or something about gratitude, which is that gratitude makes you want to share.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
That's just the most obvious thing. I know I was sort of laughing because I'm also like this proselytizer of the garden. I'm like, oh man, you got to see it. Like, this is, where I want to see people. I want to see the fruit trees. I want to know where the loquat trees are. Someone please take me in Miami. But it makes you want to be like, I have more seeds. Why don't you do this? Because this brings me so much, joy, or so much nourishment, so much fulfillment. So that, it's a beautiful. That's sort of like the explanation, and like the best, most beautiful explanation of like why we garden. It's not only because it's all those beautiful things for ourselves, but it's because we get to share it.
Yes.
It's
the sharing, yes.
I'm curious, because you have a book of essays and you also have a book of poetry, what the difference was in approaching writing the two of them?
Let's see. I think it's hard for me to answer this. I kind of explained it to the kids today. I realize that often I answer this question, I feel like I'm kind of, full of shit.
That's okay.
But, whatever. But I think I can say a couple things. One is that, like we were talking about, like poetry, that it is a kind of, there's something about poetry that I think I go toward poetry, I think this is true, when I have questions that are harder for me to even articulate as questions. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's because I do think hard of poetry as like, lines of poetry are like breaths. So poems are very bodily. A poem is always a kind of meditation on mortality, just because it's made of breaths, So already there's a kind of automatic engagement with the mysteries. And the other thing is that poems, we just understand that they think with music. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of logic, a different kind of thinking. So that sometimes allows us to maybe access stuff that, if you're writing in a sentence or you're writing in a way that is a certain kind of mode of communication, like essays tend to be. I might be drawn to do them in poems first. Very often my poems are really just racket first. They're just sort of racket, feeling around for something. Essays, they're generally, I kind of have a question that I know. I want to think about, the idea of purity, and I start writing an essay. Or I want to think about X, Y, or Z. So that's all to say, at least that, but then this, which is that, the Book of Delights, where I wrote an essay every day, I would never think to write a poem every day. It just wouldn't, the way that, when I'm called to write poems, I'm called to write poems, that's the thing. Mm-hmm. I can't call the poem in, maybe, we'll see about that in in a year. We'll revisit that, but that's how I feel about it now.
That was a really good answer. I mean, very thorough answer. I'm thinking that, sorry, I'm looking at the clock because I want to make sure that I allow enough time for audience questions. How are we doing? Are we good on time? You know, there is a poem that happens to be my favorite poem of yours, Ross, and you didn't read it. And I selfishly want to ask if you might read it if I asked you to.
Yeah, of course. Of course. What is it?
And then we could have some audience questions, perhaps. It's Come On.
Oh, really?
On page 73.
That's so sweet. You like that poem?
I love that one.
Oh, my God.
And I was waiting for you to read it, and you
Wow.
didn't. And I thought maybe we could close with that and then turn it over some audience questions.
Beautiful. That's great. Can I ask real quick, what are your favorite things you're growing right now?
Right now, tomatoes, and they're going out of season. The small cherry tomatoes, and they're going out of season. But I have this one tree that, and I love it. It delights everyone when I give it to them. It's called a miracle berry, and it's about to bloom again. You know what it is?
Just hold it at this banana farm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. You eat something sour like a lemon, and then you taste it, and then you eat a miracle berry. And it's a little tiny berry about big as your small fingernail. You eat the meat off of it because most of it is seed, and then you taste the lemon or lemonade or something with no sugar, and it tastes like a lemon candy. It is the most amazing fruit ever. And I think that's the most amazing fruit in my collection right now. And it's about to bloom again. Yeah. So the cherries are going out. I'm sorry, the cherry tomatoes are going out of season, but the miracle berries are coming in.
But they're not on yet.
They're not on yet, but you can freeze them, so I have a freezer full.
Amazing. This is called Come On. My mother is not the wings, nor the bird, but the moon across the laced hands of the nest, the palm on a fever dreamer's brow. She was born a crab, waving the twin flags of her pinchers. That's one of those poetry lies. Truth is, my poor mom's hands bruised on our butts. So that was the end of that. And when the monk slapped her ass, she didn't kick him down the stairs, but slipped the saffron tail in her pocket. Truth is, my mother's brave as a bison. For years, she dragged her hooves through the ash of her heart, head down, steam rising in ghosts from her pelt. Years where nary a blade of grass, nary bird sung. But one day, a small seed took hold, then another. Soon, beetles and spiders came back, and then, the birds were chatting in the new growth. And right now, a family of elk crosses a stream, and behind them, on a hillside, a galaxy of wildflowers shimmers and hollers. Come on.
Thank you. I think that's our time up here, so where did my friend Lisette go? Because I think we need to, I can't see, I'm so sorry. Okay, yeah, it's really bright in my face. I think we have some audience questions.
If you want to raise your hand, I'll walk over the mic so you can ask.
We have some in the front here, I think.
Hi, thank you for this reading, and just thank you both, honestly, speaking about just the love for gardening, Pat, and just your beautiful poetry, Ruske. I actually just love this so much, and I was wondering if you can speak to, honestly, there's a poem of yours that I love, speaking about a small needful fact, and there's something about participating in a lineage of creators and tenders and gardeners, Pat, that you belong to as well. And so I wonder if you can both speak to creating something that is your legacy, whether it's a poem, a plant, a family even, and just creating something that you're pouring all your life and love into, and knowing that it exists outside of you, and what it's like to watch that thing grow.
That's a beautiful question. You know, it's interesting because I'm of a couple minds. Hard to believe, but I'm of a couple minds, and one of them is that my inclination, and I think my ethical inclination actually, is to be like, you know, I have this life, I'll breathe X number of times, and then that's, you know, I don't necessarily want to be thinking about a kind of like what I'm leaving behind. In part because there's so often a kind of like among artists, like this thing of like wanting to last forever, wanting to live forever is like sort of the thing. I'm like, ooh, that's a bad idea. You know? There's like scary movies about that, you know? So in a way, I want to kind of refute that. But at the same time, it's absolutely the case that my work, I intend it to be shared. So whenever something that I've made, and when I say I actually mean, I don't mean I mean all of the people through whose care and generosity and teaching and love, I was shown the things so that periodically, every once in a while, I can like, a little thing could come out. Like these seeds, you know, seeds we put in the ground. It's like, you know, we're not wizards for putting seeds that people behind us have brought forward. That, you know, not only people either, you know. But so that's one thing. But the thing that I feel when I understand that it is the case that someone has been moved by something that I've written is gratitude. I feel just grateful, you know. I don't feel like that's an objective, or I try not to make it an objective to sort of leave something behind. But when I realize that something that I've done has moved someone the way I've been moved so many times, and then we kind of get into we become part of this lineage together, I feel grateful, yeah.
So one of the things that, one of my other passions, in addition to gardening, is family genealogy. And so one of the things that I've recently just sort of put together by accident was doing some research and going through some old papers my brother had brought by that he found of my mom's, and discovering that one of our, great-grandfathers owned a pineapple farm in the Bahamas, something I never heard anyone talk about, and it was on one of the smaller out islands. And it happened right at the same time I discovered this document, which obviously was in my care. I just, you know, when you're doing genealogy, it's like you do it and then you say, no, I can't go down that rabbit hole right now. And I discovered it just as I started growing pineapples. And I have 10 pineapples in some stage or the other growing in my backyard. So I think of it as I'm now bringing forward something my ancestor did that I did not know about growing up. It was just by happenstance, and I will pass that on to any and everyone. I share pineapples grow baby pineapple pups, I'm gonna call them. My brother and I are both now growing pineapple pups. I think we both have 10 each. And so now I can share those pups with others, and that will just keep it going on for generations and generations. But it was just so interesting how the universe works that I did not realize I had this document that talked about my great-grandfather owning a pineapple farm, a 59-acre pineapple farm in the Bahamas, and I'm growing pineapples at that very same time. And that's how the ancestors come forward and said, hey, here I am. Yes.
I'm just wondering, as you're enjoying those sweet cherry tomatoes, what about the bugs? Because often the bugs seem to enjoy them just as much as we human beings do. So how successful are you in keeping them at bay?
So, thank you. I am learning, I have learned a lot. One of the things is companion planting. I plant other things with my tomatoes. I don't plant them alone. And some of those things will attract the bugs to them and not the tomatoes as much. And because I don't want to use pesticides, because I also have a koi pond right adjacent to all my plants, so I'm not going to use pesticides. So I handpick, and when you're out there every day looking at your plants, you tend to catch these things real early, and you can get rid of them. Now, down here in South Florida, our bug pressure, I'm going to call it, gets really bad in another month. So I won't, as I said, my cherry tomatoes are going out of season, and now in will come some things that they don't want as much, or that I can manage a lot better with, and then you learn as you're growing, and I learn constantly what things they don't want to eat, or what I can plant near them that they'll go and eat that instead. And soapy water, and sometimes just water to knock them off, because you catch them early. So yeah, the bugs will try and out-eat you. And once you build a ecosystem in your backyard, we realized this last month, we have a lot of birds. The birds are eating the bugs. So, you build something and the birds come, and they don't bother me, but we watched them the other day. They attacked a lizard that apparently was going to eat some of the food, and so they ran him out the yard. A cat was trying to get something. They ran him out. But when I go out there, they're just singing to me. They're like, oh, here she comes. And they don't run me away. So, you build that sort of community in your little garden.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank Mitchell Kaplan and Books, which I'm representing with his shirt. I actually own a drum shop here in South Florida, Resurrection Drums, and we got to know each other because with the internet and everything that's going on and COVID, bookstores and stores like mine have been going away due to online shopping and people that aren't supporting the local community properly, and things like, for me, one of my favorite Sundays, my girlfriend will tell you, is going to Fairchild Tropical Garden, which you hope you get to go to while you're here or at some point. Where Douglas Fairchild introduced the mango to South Florida. It's an amazing garden. And then going to Books and filling my arms with books and sitting down and figure out which ones pick me out, and eating from their beautiful cafe as well. But Mitchell Kaplan and I became friends because of this. Sometimes he'll do 60 events a month like this that are just, he's my hero. And when bookstores and music stores are closing, he's thriving and opening new stores and doing and the other sponsors that I'm not as familiar with. But when I saw this, one day Mitchell Kaplan saw me there, walked up to me and said, looked at the books I was having, we were having a chat, and he said, I have a book I think you're going to like. And he disappeared, and he came back with your book, Inciting Joy. And it has done nothing less than that for me. Every morning I sit by my garden in my backyard next to my pool, which the beauty of just sitting next to water that the Japanese get, I understand from just sitting there, even if it's too cold to swim, which everybody up north laughs at. But the book is amazing, and I just wanted you to know that. Every essay has touched and resonated with me. So I have two questions kind of like in the book. One of them is basically a comment where you said something to the fact that you are a beautiful poem or a great friend listens to you. And it resonated with me so much, because poetry is something that I feel is so personal, and I love to read, and each one has a different meaning for me, and I'll stop and think, what does the author actually trying to say? Whereas sometimes if you just open your mind and just listen and let it come to you, it can resonate to you in different ways. So I wanted you to comment on that. And another thing I wanted to comment on is I have my playlist here of Set Free that you mentioned in the book, of every song that you mentioned in that book about dancing. That's amazing. So thank you for that recommendation as a musician. I love that. I feel like I know you better because of that. The second question is, you mentioned basketball and how much it meant to you in life and how you see different things in life. That it just was amazing to read that. Are you paying attention to the Final Four by any chance with the Miami Hurricanes, which I'm representing, and also FAU, which is unheard of. And this year, there's not the Blue Bloods. It's like a lot of different people, and we're very proud to now be the round ball state. So a lot of talk, but a lot of questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, I'm paying attention. I'm very happy for you all, and I'm happy to be down here as that's going on. I was watching for a second. I lose track of, like, I used to, like, not miss a, from the it was just the best time of year. I used to like, just because we didn't have a TV in the house, and like back then you couldn't really play the games on the computer like a little while. So I would just like go from place to place to like the place that the college where I work, where they had like TVs. There's a bowling alley, so I'd like go watch the TVs there, and then I'd run to like the bar, and then I'd run to like anyway. But I haven't been keeping up close. But I was just watching a little thing, and that they were talking about, they were saying something about, well, even that it's still like how you said it, not the blue bloods in there, it still might be a good Final Four, some commentators were saying. I was like, it's going to be the best Final Four, because it's not the same people. Anyway, I'm happy for you all. Congratulations, everyone. It's great. And to your question, I think I understand it, and it's sort of, you're asking about like how a poem or something listens to you, right? Yeah, I mean, there's some way that, and I think of like the work that I love and that I never get done loving. There's a poet named Amiri Baraka, and the first poem we talked about with it to school today, the first poem that I sort of like got turned on to poetry was his poem called "An Agony Is Now," and I read that, I read it a lot when I was young, and now I'll go back and read it periodically, and it's a poem that I still can't completely get my head around. It's a poem I feel like I'll be kind of wondering about for my whole life. And there's some way that something that invites you to wonder about it as opposed to telling you what it is. It invites you, it makes you come closer. It's a kind of listening, It seems to me like a kind of listening. It's a kind of like something that you get to look at or engage with, that is, as you do that, you're understanding yourself. You're understanding something about yourself. So that's how I think about that. And so the art that I love the most is art that, I guess not necessarily across the whole, how long I've been alive, but like art that at least for a while it sort of does that. It offers me this thing to sort of not only know about it, but to know a lot about myself by virtue of being sort of immersed in it or witnessing it or paying attention to it, or however you say it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Ross, and hi, Mrs. Braynon. Thank you so much. Tonight has been really special. I grew up in Miami my whole life, and I actually went to Indiana University for undergrad, and you made me cry in a good way, because you came to a seminar class for us in my freshman year, and you read for us, and I asked you to read a poem at the end, and nobody else was there. But anyways, it was beautiful. Sorry. That's where I started my journey in Bloomington, because it's so beautiful. There's so much greenery everywhere, and that's where I started growing things. And in the process, I also killed a lot of plants by accident. So that being said, has there ever been a plant that taught you a lesson, whether it's funny or sad or interesting? I'd like to know.
I love
for
that.
For both of you.
Yeah. I'll go first, and then, yeah. So I love that, in part because when I'm in Miami, I think of the poet Gerald Stern, who recently died, and who Mitchell and I were talking about, just a beloved, like one of my most important teachers and a beloved elder. And like, if you don't know Gerald Stern's poems and essays, go look at them. They're just beautiful, full of the natural, full of the garden too. But I remember my partner was Jerry's assistant for years, and I remember calling as I just started gardening, and I called because I broke a tomato plant. And I called, and Stephanie picked up the phone and was like, listening to me. And I was like, oh, shit, God. I was brand new. And she and Jerry together were like, oh, my God, if you can't handle that, you better stop gardening. Because Jerry gardened a lot, too. So anyway, I've done that. I've gone through that. I realized I've kind of forgotten your question, because I really just wanted to bring Jerry into the room and tell you that story. But you kind of were just asking if I've, fucked up in the garden, right? Oh, every plant teaches me lessons. Like when you were talking about cherry tomatoes, any plant that is such a lesson to learn, any plant that when you plant another plant near it, that plant thrives, that's a lesson on community. That's a lesson on civics. Oh, great, okay, so plants for the most part don't do their best when they're planted in monocultures. Interesting. Let me think that through. There's all these things. But then there are plants like, yes, that is. You're clapping for the plants. But the other thing is, that there are all these plants, as I'm a baby gardener, but I'm getting older. I'm 48, but I've been gardening for like 16 years or something. So I'm still like a baby. You get to be a baby your whole life as a gardener, which is so nice. I'm learning the things that I love to grow because I love to eat them, but also because their management, quote unquote, fits my own disposition, which is to say, you don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about them. So there's a plant called gumi, for instance, and it's related to something called autumn olive. But gumi is a completely easy plant. You put in the ground, it grows, bugs don't get it, you don't have to do much fussing. It just takes off. It makes tons of delicious fruit. The fruit hang on the thing for a while, so if you happen to be gone for a little bit, the fruit will still be there. So part of my thing of getting to be, as I learn how to garden more, is learning plants that are kind of match up with how I am, something like that, which is like a long road to hoe in a certain kind of way. Because sometimes you're like, oh man, that picture's just so great, and then you're like, okay, I'm never going to be able to grow that because it doesn't grow here, or it just acts in ways that I can't figure out,
So I guess for me, I like plants that give me a challenge. Each year I grow something I've never grown before. Year before last, I think it was black pepper. The black pepper you sprinkle on your food. I read up on it and I looked at it. So I said, I think I can do this here. I went to the nursery. The guy told me what to do. I bought my little tiny plant. And I have so much peppercorns now, I won't be buying black pepper for years, right? So, of course, the tree then died. So, but then as I continued to learn, which is growing, that it won't live forever. It's not the type of tree that, like a mango tree or something, which I have also. But I learned something that some trees, they produce and then they stop, and that's it. You get another tree if you really like it that much. And then I have other things that produce, and and I'm not even sure why. What did I do this year why I'm able to grow, for example, sage? I have so much sage growing in my garden bed, and because I put it all around, like he said, there's no monoculture, everything is community. There's sage in 3 different beds, but it seems to love that. When I had it in a pot by itself, I'm constantly out there watering it. I'm worrying about moving it from shade to sun to, fertilizer, no fertilizer. I didn't know what was wrong. This year, it's just in there with other plants, and it is so happy. It is the happiest plant in my yard, I think, right now. And so I think, I've learned that they really like this community of growing together, and I'm constantly learning. When you're gardening, you don't stop learning. I'm always reading and going on social media, garden groups that I'm in, and I'm asking questions or I'm answering questions, because sometimes I'm able to help someone else with something that I've tried and I found, oh, that doesn't work. I told someone yesterday something they told me they were doing. I said, oh, well, add this to it and that, and it'll work, because I did the same thing a couple years ago, and that won't work, So you're constantly learning from every plant. Every single plant you're learning, and putting them in that community. Each garden bed has a community of plants. There's no one thing in any garden bed, because they just don't do well alone. They do better together.
That's so beautiful. We have one more question here, and then there's another question there. So we're gonna do.
Good evening. My name is Joy, and I'm actually trying to garden, but I just can't stay consistent, or actually, I don't know what I'm doing, so I don't stay as consistent when I'm trying to garden. So what advice would any of you give me to stay in my groove when it comes to gardening?
Well, the first thing I would tell you is start small. Yeah. And then you'll have success. pick one something and talk to people. Join, their garden clubs. And now with technology, they're on social media. There are all kinds of gardening clubs, and YouTubes. I mean, my Sunday morning when nobody else is up, I'm looking at YouTube, and I find people that grow in areas that are similar to mine. There's a guy that grows in Australia. His climate is very similar to ours. So I really like watching his YouTubes, even though it's reverse of ours, it's still similar enough that I get good tips from him on how to grow things that would grow here. But start small with one or two things and then grow from there. Don't try to do a whole bunch of things at one time. I've been doing this for like 60-some years now, starting with my zinnia plant at 10. So I just told you my age.
The other thing, if I could add to that, is the thing that you choose, make it the thing that you love. Because then you'll be like, you'll be inclined if you'll be focused.
Hello, my name is Catherine Eusebio, and my question is, if you have pets, how do you make sure you're keeping your pet safe? Because I understand there's like some things that you can garden but are like toxic to your pets. So what would you say about keeping your pets safe and doing what you like, which is gardening?
So it depends on what type of pet you have. Like I said, I have koi fish, so I don't use any pesticides. And quick story, I have a lawn man that cuts my lawn, and he sprayed some Roundup, I think it's called, to kill weeds around my pond. I come home from a conference, and my husband picks me up, and he's scared to tell me, and I'm like, something's wrong. He waits till because he thinks he did something wrong. But every koi in this 2,000-gallon pond is dead. And he had to take them all out before I got home from the conference. And I'm sitting out there, and I'm about to cry because I cannot figure out. I mean, my koi are like that, right? I'm like, why did and I raise them all from babies like that. Why did my koi die? And as I'm sitting out there, just wondering why, I didn't know the lawn man had anything to do with it at that point, but I look on the waterfall, and even the moss is dead. And I said, there it is. He sprayed Roundup, so I called him. I tell him, I said, did you spray Roundup? I told you don't use that in my yard. And he said, no, only on the weeds. I said, but you do know it blows, it sprays. I said, you're getting ready to do my yard all summer for free because you just killed thousands of dollars worth of koi. So pesticides is one thing you want to keep away from your gardening area. Not only is it good, for you, but you don't want your pets to be harmed. If for plants with pets, there's certain plants, and what I would do if I had like cats or dogs, and they kind of know, they self-regulate. They kind of know what's not good for them, but you can just Google it, and it will tell you, this particular plant is not safe for dogs or cats. But with my koi, they were, they didn't have a choice where they were, and I have land tortoises too, so I have them segregated, and he knows not to go in that area. The lawn man knows don't go over there either. So, yeah. Yeah.
So my question is for Ross. You said something about poetry. Can you repeat that? Because I didn't get a chance to write it down. Poetry as breathing, I really like that.
I wish I could help you. Yeah, I can hear you.
Poetry is like storytelling. So now now I can say poetry is like breathing.
Oh, breathe, about the breath.
Yes, something like that you said.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't write it because you said it too fast.
Let's see. See, now, poems have rhymes, and I'm just joking. I was just going to the way that I think of it, like maybe I was saying that poems are made of lines, and lines, to me, are like breaths. So poems are always bodies. They always allude to the body. And if they allude to the body, if they're made of breaths, then they always allude to mortality. So they're always in some way a kind of, a contemplation or something of death. But because they're also, you might say they kind of privilege music, sound, repetition, etc., that they're, it's a kind of musical, it's a musical kind of contemplation of the profoundest mysteries. Something like that, Okay. All right. I hope I didn't disappoint you.
Well, I have
There's
to
one
say,
more question.
There's one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. One more.
I just want to also say two things. One, how nice it's been to talk with you all. It's so fun. And also to reiterate that Roundup is a toxin.
Yes.
Very toxic.
It's a toxin, It's called glyphosate. People make money off of that shit.
So thank you so much. This has been so a privilege to hear from you, and thank you for your poems and your essays because they knocked me right over. One of the things I love about what you write is how you flit sort of between this beautiful joy and then the profound sadness. And is that something I want to know that it's easy for you to go back and forth, or is that a practice you had to cultivate?
Good question. I think there's probably an element of cultivation of that. I think I'm probably, I think part of my writing practice, and again, to bring Jerry Stern back into the room, I am a student of his way of writing. And one of the things that he does beautifully is kind of veer from the delight to the sorrow. It's just kind of there. And I feel like I've had to practice that. But I also feel like it's not just a kind of literary practice or poetic or whatever, it's practice of writing. But I think that practice of writing is probably helping to be a kind of spiritual practice, When I think of joy, I don't think of joy as being a sort of emotion or whatever that exists outside of sorrow. I don't think of joy as being without or absent sorrow, life absent sorrow. I think of joy, actual joy, as being infused with sorrow, And I think of joy, in that joy book, I sort of say it something like, the ways that, what emanates from us or what we feel when we help each other carry our sorrows. But I feel like after I wrote that book, I'm getting better at what I actually mean. And I think what I really mean is the ways that we practice our entanglement, the ways we practice belonging to one another. And one of the ways that we sort of practice belonging to one another, or maybe when we do it best, is when we know that you and I are both heartbroken. We tend to one another a little bit better like that. Tending to one another makes you, if we know that we're both heartbroken, if we sort of start there, that's a baseline understanding, we're actually more inclined to be like, hey, here, I got some extra seeds. We're inclined to do that. We're inclined, generosity sort of emerges from that, I think, because it's also a site of gratitude, I suspect. Anyway, I feel like it's a practice to sort of, to be aware. I think of it as being grown. I think of it as a certain kind of refusal of what you might say a kind of commercialistic notion of the happy life that you can buy. And really a kind of aspiration to reach toward all of us who are linked up. And among the ways that we're linked up is that we're heartbroken. That's not the only thing about us that's the same. But the fact that we're going to die and everyone we love is going to die makes us family in a way, actually.
I definitely could not think of a better way to end. I just have to add that for every question about gardening, for every comment about the garden, in my head I hear it as though it is about poetry. And so some of the advice about growing and starting small, start small. Mrs. Braynon just started reading poetry and trying to think about it, and she started small, and all of you can also start not just reading, but writing your own work. And if you practice, whether it's gardening or writing poetry, it's all about giving thanks for the time that you have here on earth, for the people that are along with you, for everyone in this room. Thank you for being here tonight. Ross, Mrs. Braynon, Nicole, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. The lyric staff were amazing, and all our friends. Thank you. Ross is going to be signing books outside. We have to keep the line moving because it's getting late, so no photos. He's just going to sign for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to tackle me wherever you find me. Thank you.